The Underground Railroad by Mrs. Jacobson's 5th grade class, 2014, Wilder Elementary School, Indianola, Iowa, USA.
In 1850, slave states started to lose states. They lost California as a slave state. There were 16 slave states and 17 free states. In 1852, a book called Uncle Tom's Cabin. More than 300,000 copies were made of Uncle Tom's Cabin. I hope you had fun learning about slavery.
Underground Railroad. I learned a lot about the Underground Railroad. California didn't like slavery. The Fugitive Slave Act passed in 1850. Southern Senator only accepted California only on certain conditions. Anti-slavery still gained still more strength in 1852. Publication of Harriet Beecher Stowe's novel Uncle Tom's Cabin. Hope you like learning about slavery.
I learned many things about the Underground Railroad. Slaves were chased by men and hounds. The slaves were guided by the North Star. Thousands of slaves escaped. The Fugitive Slave Act was passed in 1850. It turned many people against slavery. The Anti-Slavery Act gained more strength in 1852. It showed people how bad slavery was. The Underground Railroad is not a real railroad. Sam, Bob J.
Learned about the Underground Railroad and slavery. I learned that slaves were chased by their owners when they tried to escape. I also learned that many people got saved. Thousands of slaves escaped because they followed the North Star. The Fugitive Slave Act was passed in 1850. The anti-slavery movement gained more strength in 1852. That's what I learned about slavery and the Underground Railroad. Jake 5J.
Daniel Fisher was an escaped slave. He was chased by men and hounds, and he followed the North Star. During the Fugitive Slave Act, slaves were outlawed in California. Those were the facts I learned about slavery. The Fugitive Slave Act started in 1850 in California. There were 17 free slave states and 16 slave states. The slaves were dragged through the streets in chains. It ended in 1850. The act gained strength in 1852. Slavery is bad and is not right. Oh, my name is Trenton.
California started statehood in 1850. They had 17 free states. They stayed and helped to encourage many Americans that slavery must be ended. And by the way, this is Dylan.
I learned California did not allow slaves. Daniel Fisher escaped slavery. The slaves followed the North Star to be free. Daniel Fisher was chased by men and hounds, but he escaped. The Fugitive Slave Act was passed in 1850. Southern Senates would act statehood. By Gage.
Hi, I'm Destiny, and I'm reading about the Underground Railroad. The Underground Railroad is an interesting thing to learn about. The Underground Railroad did not have a train or a railroad, but if you see in my picture, then you will see a train underground. I did that to give you an idea. The slaves tried to escape at night and hide by day. They were chased by men with guns and hound dogs, but they managed to escape them. A guy named Fisher escaped to freedom 30 years before the Civil War. Fisher wrote the daily newspaper called the North Star. The Fugitive Slave Act. California applied statehood. California applied for statehood in 1850. Did you also know at the time California didn't allow slavery? The Fugitive Slave Act was passed in 1850. That is some facts about the Fugitive Slave Act. Uncle Tom's Cabin. This is an event that happened in 1852. Harriet Beecher Stowe's novel Uncle Tom's Cabin. More than 3,000 copies of the book were sold within a year. The Adriatic story helped to convince many Americans that slavery must be ended. There is some facts about slavery. I'm ready. There was a man who was in the slave, and there were other men, and some were mean and some were nice. They fought because they wanted charity to win. The nice people were wanting to win because they wanted charity to have money and wanted to. And the mean people were wanting to win because they just wanted the money and gold. There was a man who got shot in the heart and hid in a box, and the nice slaves won, and one of the slaves came and got the slave that hid in the box and lived until the next war. Underground Railroad. The Underground Railroad is about slaves that were owned by people. They follow the North Star for freedom. People use slaves for housework. If the people don't want to do anything, they don't have to. I am glad and happy that slavery is over. I am Morgan Teskey.
The Underground Railroad. I learned that slavery was all around the South. Many people agreed on slavery, but many people were against slavery. Why did people in the South have slaves? It was because people had crops and chores that had to be done. Wealthy people had slaves for many years, and if a slave had a child, the child would soon be a slave too. The Underground Railroad was very important to slaves because it was the pathway to freedom. Many slaves never made it out, but the people who got out helped change America. I am glad slavery is gone. By Corshalville.
In 1850, California applied for statehood. Southerners were worried. The Fugitive Slave Act was passed in 1850. There were 17 free states and 16 slave states. The Slave Act made people mad. By Aiden.
The Fugitive Slave Act was made in the 1850s. There were 17 free states and 16 slave states. It turned a lot of people away from slavery. By Ryder.
In 1850, California applied for statehood. California didn't like slaves. If California joined the Union, there would be 17 free states and 16 slave states. So then the North would be able to outvote the South in the U.S. Senate. The Southern states only accepted California on certain conditions. One condition was they must allow capturing slaves any place in the nation. Then in 1850, the Fugitive Slave Act passed. The Northerners got shocked when they saw African Americans being dragged on the street with chains. Phoebe.
As you can see, this girl is getting auctioned off. Slaves were treated badly. Sometimes they would get whipped with a belt. Some slaves would run away but not make it. They would be hunted down. If they stole, they would be punished or even killed. By Lizzie McGraw.
The Fugitive Slave Act was passed in 1850. The Fugitive Slave Act thus turned many people against slavery. Uncle Tom's Cabin took place during the anti-slavery movement. It still gained more strength in 1852, publication of Harriet Beecher Stowe's novel of Uncle Tom's Cabin. These two stories have very close dates. By Tyler.
3 things about the Underground Railroad are, wait, here's one. The Underground Railroad is a way to get free for slaves. Another thing is that Harriet Tubman followed the North Star, which is the Underground Railroad. Is the North Star. My last thing is that Underground Railroad leads to the northern Canada. These are some facts about the Underground Railroad. By Naomi. A man named Fisher wrote the daily newspaper called the North Star. The man who wrote it was a slave. Slaves were treated like evil people. They were whipped and worked harder than necessary. One day, Harriet Tubman thought she and other slaves should not be treated like that. She and other slaves used the Underground Railroad to escape to freedom. They were chased by slave hunters, and their hounds. It was dangerous, but it ended up in war. After the war, slaves had rights. Slaves were freed and wouldn't be owned anymore. by Shelby.
California did not allow slavery. The Fugitive Slave Act law let captured slaves who escaped anywhere in the nation be captured and returned to their owners. By Sadie.
If slaves tried to run away and got caught, then they would probably get punished. If they ran and didn't get caught, then they were free. By Jordan.
The Underground Railroad is not really underground, and it's not a railroad either. The Underground Railroad was about slaves getting to freedom. In my picture, the slave is riding in a coach type of thing. This is how slaves get to freedom. By Abby.
Nicely.
California applied for statehood in 1850. The southern states worried if we joined the Union, there would be only 17 free states. The Fugitive Slave Act changed people and made them change their mind against slavery. The Fugitive Slave Act ended in passed in 1850. By Logan.